Our very special event tonight. Today has been day one of our inaugural Close Encounters Conference, and I have to say it's been remarkable. Many experiences. Tomorrow is our second and final day. You're most welcome to come along and join us. Up close and personal with James Bartley. How fortunate are we? James Bartley is an internationally recognised speaker on alien and military abductions. He's an abductee, contactee, and MILAB himself. James has been in the UFO field for over 25 years and is a protege of legendary alien abduction researcher Barbara Bartholic. James was a friend and colleague of the late great researcher Dr. Carla Turner. James has worked in an intelligence-related capacity in the US Naval Air Forces, Pacific Fleet, and has investigated many alien and military abductions around the world. James has been at the forefront of exposing the reptilian overlordship for over 25 years, and I'm sure you are going to be in for a big treat tonight. So can you please give a very warm welcome to James Bartley.
Thank you so much for coming. Byron Bay is a beautiful place. This whole region is a beautiful place. There's a lot of things that you folks could have done on a weekend in a place like this, but it speaks volumes of who you are, that you would take the time out of your busy lives and allocate funds and you know, your savings, whatever the case may be, and make an effort to be here. And I'm sure there have been many others who tried to come here as well, but for one reason or another, spiritual warfare, for example, things like that crop up sometimes that prevent people from coming to these kinds of events. So I really applaud all of you for making an effort to come here, and despite whatever challenges you may have overcome, the bottom line is you were here. I want to thank Catherine and Mick for putting together such a wonderful event, and this is the first of its kind, and I hope many more such events follow over the years. And I want to say hello to some of the local fellow researchers and colleagues. Evan Strong, dear friend of ours. I had a great good fortune of meeting George Kavasilis. I've been looking forward to that. And also, you know, and I really am interested in hearing your stories today and tomorrow while we're here. And so myself and my partner Kylie, we want to thank you for all coming here. This is a very special event. This is my podcast show. It's called The Cosmic Switchboard. And in the relatively short period of time we've had the Cosmic Switchboard, we feel we've made an impact. We've had some world-class guests, the great Puerto Rican UFO investigator Jorge Martin. A couple of weeks ago we had Peter Moon talk about the Romanian Sphinx and the Hall of Records beneath the Romanian Sphinx in the Brisbane Mountains. We've had just a variety of speakers, guests rather. And in the middle of the week, I do a commentary. I talk for various, you know, from an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, about a variety of subjects. And the Cosmic Switchboard show not only exposes the surface level conspiracy fact, but we also expose what's beyond the 5 cents conspiracy. But we're also solutions oriented. We just had a guest the other day talking about real communities, rebuilding communities, real sustainability, not this faux Agenda 21 type of sustainability, real sustainability. Well, when we come back from our trip here, we're going to have another guest talking about organic farming and building farming communities. So we're very solutions oriented. So for a conference only special, normally it's $75 US for a whole year. Again, there's 2 podcasts a week, a commentary from me, and then I have an interview, a 2-hour interview with a guest. So that's 8 podcasts a month. plus whatever special articles, guest articles, so on and so forth. We're expanding this year. We're going to be moving more towards videotaped interviews, field investigations being videotaped, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a one-time only special offer. For 80 Australian dollars, you have a full year membership with the Cosmic Switchboard, allows you access to all the part twos of the interviews, and also for that $80 Australian dollars, you get not only a whole year, but you have a consult with me about alien abductions, reptilian abductions, MILAB experiences, or if you just want to talk about anything that strikes your fancy, that's quite all right with me. Now, before I start, there's some things I need to point out. The information I'm going to share with you is going to be confronting to many of you, and especially when the second half rolls around and I start talking about reptilian abductions, because we must shine light upon the darkness. We can't tell ourselves that we're so spiritually evolved that we can just bliss out and tune out all that's going around us, not just in the 3D level, but from a hyperdimensional interference level. Go onto the Cosmic Switchboard, listen to an interview a few weeks ago with Bernard Grunther talking about hyperdimensional interference from multiple angles, from extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, and so forth. Now, what happens sometimes when I share this kind of information is, for those people that have a lot of unresolved, buried trauma, they can get triggered. And the triggering can manifest in a number of ways. They may fall asleep, they may get agitated, they may become even hostile. They may feel an overwhelming compulsion to get up, smoke a cigarette, get up and just leave. Or, like I said, get angry at me, right? Now, just because someone doesn't believe the information I'm sharing, don't understand it, or whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean the information is not true. This is information that I've collated for over 25 years. My mentor, Barbara Bartholic, was doing alien abduction research for 30 years. So that's a large institutional body of memory, of information that I'm drawing from today. So if some of this information is triggering to the point where it makes you start to feel animosity or hostility to me, and you begin to outwardly project, that's something that you've got to work through, right? Because you're here to accept or reject the information. It's entirely up to you. I'm just here to put the information out, and it's up to you how you assimilate it. And I encourage you to listen to your body, listen to your energy field, and go within, and just go with your heart center and see what resonates with you. Some of the stuff that I share may not make any sense now, but it may make sense further down the track. Another thing I want to address is, I've been in this field for 25 years. I spent a lot of time in America, in the desert Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, Southern California, and Northern California, and I network with people all over the world dealing with these hardcore issues. What I've seen, and this goes back clear back in the day, that when some people share what are perceived by some to be negative alien abduction experiences, those people that have what I would say to have more of a new age mindset about the subject, they go from being new age love and light to the claws come out. Like, how dare you talk about negative alien experiences? And they project out, and then they start shaming and trying to make that person feel bad about themselves, feel poorly about themselves. Well, you know, the only reason you've had negative experiences is because you're spiritually unevolved, vibrationally challenged, whatever the euphemism is, spiritually retarded, right? And look what's done also to children. There are children that are being abducted by aliens. They can't sleep without the lights on. They can't sleep on their own. They're afraid to go even upstairs, not just to a certain bedroom. They don't even want to be upstairs where some of these experiences have happened. And so some of these people who would presume to have you believe that all ETs are of necessity spiritually evolved, and who are we, you know, hairless primates to say otherwise? These people who say that only people that have, you know, negativity within them and are fear-based have these experiences, well, that's indefensible. And I, for one, don't stand for that, because I've met many children who've had experiences, who are scared of the dark, who can't sleep without the lights on, terrified when they see like a cartoon figure that even looks like an alien. I've had personal friends of mine that are females that have had horrendous hemorrhaging, vaginal hemorrhaging after these experiences. Their hormones, yeast infections, all kinds of things going on. So we have to be spiritually mature about this. Again, the darkness flees from the light. When we light a match in a dark room, the darkness flees. And this is spiritual warfare, and it's a frequency war. As long as you retain a heart-centered perspective, as long as you stay embodied and grounded. Too many people in the New Age field, they talk about vibrating at a higher level and ascending, but we're here in physical embodiment to anchor higher frequencies. To say we have to raise our vibrations is like putting the cart before the horse. We have to be physically embodied. That's why we're here. Anchor higher frequencies, come from a heart-centered space of non-judgmentalism, of compassion, of encouragement. We are all spiritual warriors. We all volunteered for this gig. And it's a little too late now to back out. So, I just wanted to put that out there before I get started, because a lot of people out there in America, Australia, all over the place, they're into shaming and guilting people who come forward about experiences that are, quite frankly, in some cases, traumatic and frightening. Now, I've had encounters with both positive and negative beings. I've had encounters with Andromedan beings. I've had encounters with Palladians. And there are good reptilians. There's entire planets full of them. I'm not here to talk about the good reptilians. They're not the problem. I'm not here to talk about, the good aliens. They're not a problem. It's the negative ETs, the service to self types that we have to be wary of and have to recognize their modus operandi. That way, when we do have interference and manipulation in our life, the recovery time doesn't have to drag on for days, weeks, and months. We can, in short order, get ourselves back on course, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. Now, this first part of the night, I'll be talking about military abductions. What is a MILAB? A military abduction, that's what a MILAB is. It's a contraction. But my definition of a MILAB is someone who is a legitimate alien abductee first and foremost. This is a person who has alien abduction, alien encounter experiences. And again, there's a variation of what I just talked about. Some people say, oh, these MILABs, they're just victimized people. They've drawn all this to them. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Within their DNA profile, within their morphogenetic resonance field, some of these people, these MILABs, have the genetic morphic ancestry of several different extraterrestrial races or more. I know people that are Andromedan contactees, Arcturian contactees, Palladian contactees, and they're still having MILAB experiences. So this notion that only fear-based people have MILAB experiences is also nonsense, and it's dismissive and insulting to people who've gone through a lot of trauma. Now, celestially driven cataclysms. This is a big part of this talk, and I want to talk very briefly about Planet X, the brown dwarf, call it what you will. There is a big psyop out there to make people think that, well, it runs the gamut from making people think it's real, imminent, and we're going to get wiped out tomorrow, or it's all like a psyop, it's all disinformation. The fact of the matter is, and you only have to go within. I can't tell you what the believer think. I've seen the second sun from two perspectives. Not only was I on terra firma on the ground when I saw this extra sun at the 2 o'clock position about 5 p.m. on an autumn evening, 2 nights in a row, and I've seen it on other occasions because we have a perma-chemtrail haze above us. A perma-chemtrail haze, and the chemtrail agenda is multifaceted. It's not just to sicken people and infect them with nanobots or Morgellons, whatever the case may be. It's also to obscure these incoming celestial bodies. If you look to the western horizon around sunset, often as not, where I'm from, I live in New South Wales, the whole western skyline, there's a dark, fake cloud cover. And sometimes the bottom of this fake cloud cover is as straight as a ruler's edge and just a few degrees above the horizon, above the mountain ranges. So there's only like this little band of space that you can see. And sometimes when that extra star is there, you will see multiple sources of light. You will see, okay, that's the setting sun. But over here, you see all these powerful light sources coming through. That is a manifestation of the second sun. Okay, now I said that I saw the second sun on at least 2 occasions, actually more on the ground. But I also saw the second sun when I was 35,000 feet in the air, flying over, I think it was Central Asia, Azerbaijan someplace. And I was near the back of the airplane. In fact, I was in a British Airways flight heading out to the UK to give a lecture at the very first Reptilian Conference, a conference dedicated to only about the reptilian issue. And I was one of the speakers. And I was at the back of the plane waiting to use the lavatory, hunched over, and I looked out this window. Here is the rising sun over here. It was the morning. And we were above the fake cloud cover, And I could clearly see the top half of the brown dwarf, red dwarf, whatever you want to call it. Sun rising over here and raising above the fake cloud cover the brown dwarf. And then when I got back to my seat, a couple of Japanese tourist gals sitting next to me. I was pointing out the window, look, second sun. They didn't understand a word I said. I asked them to take pictures. They did. I gave them my email address, asked them to send me pictures. Never happened, okay? So the point I'm making is that these celestially driven cataclysms come back. They're cyclical. It's in the geological record. It's in the fossil record. There's absolute proof that this happens roughly about every 12,500 years, and these celestially driven cataclysms sometimes tend to last for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Because sometimes these celestially driven cataclysms, follow on the coattails of one another. And so what I'm saying is the powers that be, the would-be rulers of this planet and beyond, are up against a celestially driven timetable. They have to put everything in place and have this global police state, this Orwellian microchip, transhumanist nightmare agenda, have everything in place before these celestially driven cataclysms kick in earnest, because then they begin to lose control, then they begin to lose power. So it's a race between us, quite frankly, tapping into that latent metaphysical power that many of you have and use it from a heart-centered place. And it's a race between that and the fear they're trying to impose and the control they're trying to impose. And ultimately, as I'll point out, this control system is not being run by power-mad bankers. It is being done by non-human intelligence working through hybridized bloodlines. It's another picture. Okay, now we're getting to the MILAB part of the story. I'm an independent historian I specialize in military history from ancient times to modern times, emphasis in special operations, counterintelligence, intelligence. This is one of the smoking guns of the whole UFO field. And some of you are already familiar with this, my apologies to you, but for the benefit of those who are not familiar with this, I need to point this out as background. We all know about Roswell. Roswell is the case that makes the case. I will never tire about talking about Roswell, because that is where we have all this abundant proof about a non-human extraterrestrial intelligence here on Earth. This is the Dr. Robert Sarbacher letter. Dr. Robert Sarbacher was a Pentagon consultant. He had his own missile development company. He worked for the Pentagon. At the time he wrote this letter, Robert Sarbacher was a dean of the Washington Institute of Technology. Now, this letter from Robert Sarbacher was in response to a letter written by William Steinman, a UFO investigator back in the day. You can see the date, November 29, 1983. And William Steinman was particularly asking about the Aztec UFO crash, which happened around March 1948. And this is the response from Dr. Robert Sarbacher. Again, Dr. Robert Sarbacher was a Pentagon consultant who had his own missile development corporation. Dear Mr. Steinman, I am sorry to have taken so long in answering your letter, etc., etc. To answer your last question, is your letter of October 14, 1983, there is no particular reason I feel I shouldn't or couldn't answer any or all of your questions. You listed some of your questions in your letter of September 12th. I will attempt to answer that as you had listed them. 1, relating to my own experiences regarding recovered flying saucers, I had no association with any of the people involved in the recovery. In this instance, he's talking about the Aztec crash in March 1948. And have no knowledge regarding the dates of the recoveries. If I had, I would send it to you. 2, regarding verifications that persons you list were involved, I can only say this. John von Neumann was definitely involved. Dr. Vannevar Bush was definitely involved, and I think Dr. Robert Oppenheimer also. Now that is a smoking gun. Finding secret saucer scientists is very much like spy hunting. You find one spy, and often as not, they lead you to another spy and a whole network of spies. Let's start with that first name, Dr. John von Neumann. He was a computer scientist, a consultant at Manhattan Project. He, along with Alan Turing, are rightly considered the fathers of modern computing and mathematics. Dr. John von Neumann was definitely involved in the back engineering of recovered alien technology. That's a key point. This relates to the late 1940s and 1950s time frame. Dr. Vannevar Bush was definitely involved. Dr. Vannevar Bush started the National Defense Research Committee, and then he formed the Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II. Office of Scientific Research and Development was the parent organization for what became the Manhattan Project. The OSRD was the Pentagon consultant agency, which helped develop the proximity fuse, radar, and a variety of other things. Dr. Vannevar Bush was deeply involved in black projects involving military weaponry. And I think Dr. Robert Oppenheimer also. And we have also circumstantial evidence, corroborating evidence from other leaked documents. This is not a leaked document. That Dr. Robert Oppenheimer was also involved. Who was Dr. Robert Oppenheimer? Head of the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton. He was the theoretical physicist who taught at Caltech and Berkeley prior to World War II. He did fast neutron research in Berkeley prior to being taken on as the director of the Los Alamos nuclear atomic weapons project. They call it atomic weapons in those days. After World War II, he became the chairman of the General Advisory Committee of the Atomic Energy Commission, a very powerful position. And he was also involved. And in the last paragraph there, my association with the Research and Development Board under Dr. Compton during the Eisenhower administration was rather limited, so that although I had been invited to participate in several discussions associated with reported recoveries, I could not personally attend the meetings. I am sure that they would have asked Dr. von Braun and the others you listed. And he goes on in the next letter. Actually, I didn't include the next page, but he talks about how Dr. Carl Compton was the director of the Joint Army-Navy Research and Development Board. This is an important point to make. Dr. Carl Compton was the brother of Dr. Arthur Compton, who got the Nobel Prize for his research in cosmic rays. Today, you often hear people say, oh, blue beam, that explains all UFOs, all aliens, every single craft you see, that's a man-made craft. Again, putting the cart before the horse. Oh, DARPA, they're the ones that are making people think that they're having alien abductions and seeing UFOs. Well, actually, DARPA, the predecessor, the original ancestor for DARPA, was the Joint Army-Navy Research and Development Board, headed up by Dr. Carl Compton, which at least by the late 1940s was already working on recovered alien technology. And when I talk about alien technology, I mean the metallurgy, the chemistry, the physics behind the alien technology, the power plant, the fuel systems, the navigation systems, the lot. There are people that try to be dismissive about Roswell. Oh, they're obsessed with Roswell. And then they try to make it seem like it's no big deal. But Roswell is the case that makes the case. But it was not the first. And when I get back from this conference, I'm going to be interviewing on my show Paul Blake Smith, who's written a book about the Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 1941 alien crash retrieval. 1941. I'm going to be interviewing him. So basically, this means that these people have been doing this kind of research with this caliber of individual. There's Dr. Carl Compton, and there's Ben Rich. And now we're fast forwarding here, but I just wanted to make the point. When you hear people say, oh, DARPA, blue beam, no aliens exist, it's all stealth aircraft. DARPA's original ancestor was the Joint Army-Navy Research Development Board, with those scientists working on actual recovered alien technology. Now, this is the late Ben Rich. Ben Rich was the director of Skunk Works. Again, some of you are familiar with this, but I'm laying a groundwork for the MILAB stuff, okay? Because those that are involved with this deep black, weird science, secret space program, and actually there's a number of programs and factions that run in parallel. I don't think it's one monolithic block that makes up what has been referred to as the breakaway civilization. I believe there are factions. That's just my feeling about it. So they are far beyond the experimental stage. They're far beyond, poking a stick at the technology and, well, how do you turn this on? They've gone operational. They've been operational. I mentioned earlier that I'm a student of military history, special operations. There was a military magazine I used to read in the 1980s called Gung Ho. And there was a wonderful article in there where, according to the sources of the editors and the writers of the Gung Ho magazine, and the writers and editors are ex-military people, people with intelligence connections. And there was a whole article in there about how the U.S. military, actually corporations, have control of this technology, of course, have been working on this technology in the Nevada desert for decades by then. Dr. Ben Rich, the late director of Lockheed's Skunk Works. Skunk Works is Lockheed's advanced development wing. Ben Rich was a protege of the founder of the Skunk Works, Kelly Johnson. Ben Rich knew as much about the hardware of the recovered alien technology as anyone around. And he made what amounted to a deathbed confession to Tom Keller, if his memory serves. Tom Keller was an aerospace consultant with the Mutual UFO Network. Ben Rich said, the military already fly the stars. There was an error in the equations. We made the correction, and now it won't take lifetimes to get to the stars. The military flies, goes to other star systems, to other planets routinely, he said in so many words. He said, we now have the technology to take ET home. He also said, he asked the interviewer, Tom Keller, okay, Tom Keller asked how the navigation worked on these craft, and Ben Rich said, I'll ask you a question, how does ESP work? And Tom Keller said, all time and space is one. And then Ben Rich said, exactly, that's how it works. So what Ben Rich was saying was these occupants, these pilots of the craft, they have some kind of symbiotic linkage with the technology. They don't have the time at the speeds they travel to press buttons or, play with a joystick or whatever. Their commands to the craft are instantaneous. So when Ben Rich says that the military is already flying the stars, that means something, okay? So this is just leading up to the whole part about MILABs. Bob Lazar, many of you are familiar with the story. I'll just give it short shrift here. Bob Lazar was a physicist working under contract for the United States Navy, back engineering Zeta Reticuli craft. And he was the one that coined the term element 115 to describe the fuel source. I met him, and this is the lecture that he gave at the Lil A'Le Inn, which is adjacent to the infamous Area 51. And Bob Lazar was working at S4 in the Nevada desert, late 1980s. Now the stories about recovered craft, the test flying of alien craft in central Nevada have gone back for decades. Project Red Light, different names for the projects involving the analysis of recovered, and it's not always recovered alien technology as a result of a crash. Sometimes they shoot craft down. Sometimes, as I'll get into shortly, there has been an ongoing interaction between certain factions of the deep black military aerospace community and non-human life forms. That's me in the center mugging for the camera. On the right is Bill Uhouse. Bill Uhouse was a Marine aviator test pilot, and after his stint in the military, he became an engineer. I think he was working for Westinghouse. I may be wrong about that. And the point of relevance is that he's what you call a limited hangout. His information was earth-shaking in the UFO field at the time, but because lamestream media won't cover it, nobody knows about it, basically. But Billy Uhouse was working on a flight simulator, navigation simulator, based on the craft that was recovered in my old stomping grounds, Kingman, Arizona, in 1953. Interesting note about the compartmentalization and the nature of the secrecy. He said it was 3 years before he and his team even knew what they were working on. And like I said, it was a simulator, a flight simulator, and a navigation system based on the craft recovered in Kingman, Arizona in 1953. Oh, and that's not all. His colleague at S4, because he was doing this research and analysis and what have you at S4, his colleague was an alien he called J-Rod. Okay, we're getting to the MILABs part. We've all heard stories about bloodlines, hybrid bloodlines. In truth, many of us are hybrids. If most of you came into this world the normal way through childbirth, you have within you the genetic morphic resonance profile of one or more ET races. And the fact of the matter is that within the DNA profile and morphic resonance field of these individuals, there exists latent metaphysical powers. Adepts, warlocks, sorcerers have known this throughout the ages, mystics, seers, etc. But also deep black elements of the military intelligence community. Now, Dan Sherman is a guy, his story really hasn't gotten much currency in the field. He was interviewed by Kerry Cassidy, Project Camelot. He was a MILAB for all intents and purposes. His mother was being abducted by Zeta Greys. He was being abducted by Zeta Greys. And he was genetically altered by the Zetas for the express purpose of making him more telepathic. Because from the moment he was born, he was shadowed, followed, and at key junctures in his life, he was shunted into this job, he was shunted into that occupation. Eventually, through this covert, unseen guidance, he attained a job with the Air Force Security Service, now known as the Air Force Electronic Security Command, which is the Air Force's NSA subsidiary, National Security Agency. And his job title was an intuitive communicator, a telepath. He was trained to be able to telepathically talk to the Zetas. And it was a long, drawn-out process. You got to read his book. It's a really good book. And he found out that the information that was being sent to him telepathically, usually from two different Zetas, was always the same. It was a long number serial designation, and it was latitude and longitude coordinates. He realized over time that the long number serial designation was an identifier of an alien, what amounts to an alien abductee. And the latitude and longitude was where the individual was abducted and where they were returned. And he was in that project. It was called Project Preserved Destiny. He was told by his Air Force Security Service superiors that the reason it's called Project Preserved Destiny, and it cycles back to what I talked about at the outset, is he was told, and he was in this project in the 1970s, he was told there's going to be a point in time when the grid's going to go down and all comms are going to be wiped out. But we're going to have to maintain comms with at least one particular ET race, the Zetas. And I showed you Bob Lazar. He was working on Zeta technology at S4. So the Zetas turn up again and again in the lore of the UFO field. And I'm satisfied that at least one faction of the Zetas, and remember, Zeta Reticuli is a binary star system, and there's probably any number of planets there. So it's not like a generic Zetas, they're all the same. I'm not saying that. But at least one faction of the Zeta Greys are in cahoots with deep black elements of the military. And so he was trained from essentially as birth, was genetically modified to become an intuitive communicator because he was told that eventually the grid's going to go down. And I talked to him earlier about celestially driven cataclysms and the celestially driven timetable that the powers that be have to operate under. Okay? That's picture sent to me. I put it at that particular point just to add some immediacy to this, right? That's Dave. He's a MILAB. He lives here in New South Wales somewhere. Lots of MILABs in Australia, by the way. It's not just an American phenomenon. There's a lot of MILABs in the UK. It's a bloodline thing. And again, some of these bloodlines, which recur again and again, we hear about them in the UFO field. Scotch, Irish, Celtic, Gaelic, Native American, Aboriginal, Koori. Again and again, these bloodlines come up. And the deep black elements of the military, probably at the insistence and prodding of the aliens they're working with, seem to know who out there has this DNA profile, which makes them, it's all about utilizing these people as operational assets, is what it amounts to, and I'll get to that. So notice the triangular pattern. I've had similar bruises before. Sometimes you can have an angry looking bruise like that and not even feel any discomfort. I mean, it's very odd. And something that angry looking can disappear like in a day without a trace. Okay, I'm going to start talking about the MILABs now. Again, my definition of a MILAB. And I should have had a watch. What's the time right now? Because we're going to take a break at 8:15 thereabouts. I'm sorry? 25 to 8. Okay, fantastic. Again, my definition of a MILAB is a legitimate alien abductee first who has military abductions. And what the military does is they identify these people. And if you look throughout society, how often do the powers that be or even simple doctor's offices obtain people's DNA profiles? Even at birth, they're taking the placental blood from babies without even asking the parents. So this belongs to us now, right? So all this genetic information is winding up somewhere. And somehow, some way, they seem to know who are alien abductees in society. And it's even more extreme in the military. I've spoken to a number of legitimate alien abductees who served in the military. And often as not, sometime during their stint in the military, they wound up being pulled into a weird science mind control project. And the only commonality that we can come up with is that they have alien abduction experiences also. But remember, when I say alien abduction, but some of these people also have encounters with positive, spiritually evolved ETs, higher dimensional ETs. There's a push-pull going on. There's almost a cosmic tug-of-war. Like these negative ETs want to pull these MILABs into these black weird science projects to advance their agenda. And on the other hand, these individuals, these MILABs, many of whom I consider boots on the ground, many of them I consider ground crew, because again, they're celestially, morphically related to the Arcturians, to the Palladians, to the Andromedans, and they're ground crew here, and they're being pulled this way and that. So remember that. Now, we first started hearing about military abductions, I would say the late 80s, early 90s, because some of the people, when I was living in Southern California, were starting to report not only were they having ET encounters, but at times, occasionally, deep black elements of the military would come to their house and abduct them, sometimes at gunpoint. And back then, they would be taken out of the home, often at night, sometimes early in the morning, or during the day when the husband was away at work, for example. The military would come and they would take the woman or the man to a waiting van, oftentimes a white van, or a sedan or some other car, and then they would take them away. Sometimes they'd wind up in an underground facility. Sometimes they would wind up in a highly secure part of a surface military installation. Sometimes they would wind up in a corporate office building somewhere in town. And they would be sometimes drugged, debriefed, harshly interrogated, sometimes abused. For some people, depending on the remoteness of their homes, they would be taken away by helicopter. Lil A'Le Inn was a friend of mine. She was from Alabama. And when she was living in Mississippi, the military would come to her rural home, land a helicopter in her front yard, and take her out of her house at gunpoint, put her onto the helicopter, take her to a nearby Air Force base. And the moment they got her there, they would inject her with drugs and start to interrogate her and harass her, basically mind control her, threaten her. They oftentimes wanted to know what she was doing or getting up to with these different ET groups. And that's interesting too, because these deep black elements of the military, like I said, they have their own factions, they have their own alliances with certain ET groups. And Unlike what a lot of the New Agers would have you believe, everything is love and light. Actually, in the cosmos and in the multiverse, there's a lot of conflict. There is a lot of conflict between different ET groups. Always has been. Our solar system looks like a battlefield. If you look at Mars and you look at all the destruction meted out to it, you look at the asteroid belt, which in all likelihood was a very large planet that was blown apart. You look at Uranus tilted on its side. There's been all of that cannot be explained only by celestially driven cataclysms. There's evidence of warfare on a mass scale in our solar system, which in reality is merely an extension of these ongoing cosmic wars going back to the Orion constellation and what have you. Some of you actually have memories and dreams of being in these Orion wars where you yourself was an alien and you were fighting the Draco Empire, whatever the case may be. Over time, the means of abducting these MILABs started to vary. They started to get more woo-woo, more weird science. After a while, some of the MILABs began reporting being teleported away from their homes at night. Well, let me backtrack a little bit and talk about one of the more mundane ways that they abducted people in the old days. The abductee would be laying in bed, ready to turn in. The phone would ring. They would pick the phone up. It would be a voice on the other end saying a series of numbers. And when they were finished saying the series of numbers, they hung up. And at that, the person who answered the phone would go into a trance state, would get up, walk out to the front yard, and there would be the military waiting for them. And it varied. There are elements of the Army are involved, deep black elements of the Air Force, deep black elements of the Navy. They would take this person, put him in a van, haul him away. Also, they have technology which renders the people in the house, everyone in the house, unconscious, in a paralyzed state, whatever the case may be. They may show up in the morning, say when the husband's gone off to work, and the military person will be standing there with a black box with wires coming out of it and knobs on it. They activate this black box. Everyone in that home, including the pets, dogs, cats, they're all kind of just rendered unconscious. Some kind of carrier frequency wave. They go in, they say, hello, Sally, whatever her name is, and they take her away. So that's another way that they do this. And oftentimes, again, some of these people wind up in underground bases, and I'll talk more about that. Over time, what began to happen was people started being abducted by deep black elements of the military and sometimes by ETs in the same encounter experience, where the person would wake up. This happened to Pam Hamilton. Her husband, Bill Hamilton, was a former member of the Air Force Security Service I mentioned earlier, but he was also a contactee and a UFO researcher. Pam was having reptilian and military experiences. She woke up one morning, the house was blacked out. There was a guy standing there in a black SWAT-type uni ball cap, and he was holding one of these black boxes. And he said, oh, the power is out. Well, I wonder why. Long story short, they take her out of the house, and then above the house is a very large craft emitting its own mist and its own cloud bank. Now, real legitimate alien craft also can create their own cloud banks to hide in, but apparently some of these man-made craft can do the same thing. So she looks up, sees a big craft, there's grays around, there's an Air Force person yelling orders at the grays, and then eventually they take her up into the craft and take her away. There has been an ongoing interaction between deep black elements of the military and intelligence community and the aerospace community. And it should be noted that once the military gets a hold of this technology, they do the initial analysis. What happens a lot of times, eventually, that alien technology winds up in private, i.e. corporate hands. It winds up with the big aerospace conglomerates, Boeing, Lockheed, et cetera, et cetera. At the deep black levels, they're all consolidated, they're all merged. For example, in the high desert of Southern California, in the Antelope Valley, the nickname for the Antelope Valley is Aerospace Valley because that's where a lot of these aerospace corporations have operations. And not only do they have big surface level operations, they have big underground operations. Like Lockheed has the Helendale facility in the Antelope Valley, and it's underground. Nearby is Edwards Air Force Base. Large underground facilities beneath there, China Lake, Air Force Plant 42, I think Air Force Plant 42. Some of the MILABs report being taken to these underground bases or being taken to these corporate aerospace facilities underground. And then, like I said, things started to go woo-woo. They weren't only just being taken out up in the craft, and sometimes within the craft there would be like a joint alien-human crew. Sometimes there was only human military. But after a while, people began reporting being teleported to underground facilities, where they would be laying in bed, next thing you know, they're just like pulled through a portal, and then they wind up in an underground facility. Now, these people are utilized as operational assets. And depending on the genetic profile, the morphic resonance, the latent metaphysical abilities, combined with whatever surface level skill sets they may have, the military will use them accordingly. For example, if someone has a medical background in the surface world existence, like a nurse, a doctor, a first responder, they may use that person in a mind-controlled state in an underground base doing medical work. If someone has like a military background, they may train that person in military operations using weaponry. Now, I don't like the term super soldier. You hear it a lot in the field. I detest the term because it puts a fine gloss over what is essentially exploitation, mind control, trauma. A lot of people in the field out there, they call themselves super soldiers. Again, I don't like that term. I prefer, what people need to do is, when they have these experiences, say, I'm a MILAB. Well, not necessarily I'm a MILAB, but I've had a MILAB experience. But I don't identify as being a MILAB because that's a title, that's a label. I'm a sovereign being who's had these kinds of experiences and these kinds of challenges that I'm trying to overcome and others are trying to overcome. But that much being said, there is very much a military aspect to the training that some of these MILABs are being subjected to. Now, let's think about military training in the surface level, for example, okay? We're all familiar with special forces and whatnot. Let's take a unit like the Royal Marine Commandos, based in Lympstone, England. Not many people realize it, but covert intelligence operatives from British MI6, Australian Secret Intelligence Service, Canadian intelligence, they send their covert paramilitary operatives to the Royal Marines in Britain to be trained in specialist techniques, black ops, covert warfare, psychological warfare operations, which involves shooting weapons, which involves fast roping down from helicopters, which involve water missions, frogmen type skills, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting is many MILABs report being trained in these specialist military techniques and skills. I'm not saying they're as good as the British Royal Marines. I'm not saying they're as good as the British SAS. But I'm saying that some of the things that the SAS are taught at the surface level are being taught to these MILABs. And it's not just males that are being taught this. Women, housewives, someone you wouldn't even look twice at in a store are being trained in these military tactics. Room clearing, hostage rescue, running with an integrated unit through a house and clearing rooms and selective shooting under duress, who to shoot at, who not to shoot at. Practicing taking down airlines that have been hijacked. A variety of different skill sets. And what's also interesting is these people that are going through this military training report seeing people who for all the world look like what we would call special forces. Some of the trainers look like SAS operatives or Navy SEALs, people like that. And in actual fact, that's what happens. There's deep black elements of the military. They do the psych profiles, they check out the DNA profiles of all the members in the ranks. I mentioned earlier how so many people that are legitimate alien contactees have issues sometimes when they're in the military. They seem to know they've had these experiences, so they get pulled into a weird science project. Well, within their ranks, within the ranks of the military, they know who these people are that have this DNA profile or have the latent ability to disassociate because of whatever trauma that's been subjected, that their family tree line has been subjected to, dissociation is an inheritable trait. So they find people like this in special forces, and then they pull them into these weird science projects. And pretty soon they're training these civilian MILABs to do all these different tasks. Now, what's also interesting, and again it ties into the celestially driven cataclysm aspect, is that many MILABs are taught to survive a variety of contingencies, let's say. Apocalyptic contingencies, apocalypse revealing, right? And some of these contingencies, some of these possible scenarios, future scenarios, could involve surviving nuclear war or a nuclear biological chemical environment. Some of them deal with surviving in a civil unrest, societal breakdown kind of scenario. Some of these people have been trained to survive in the wild, how to forage for food, and not only forage, but also how to form teams, survivable teams, okay? You go out, you find clean drinkable water, you go out and you find firewood, you go out and you do something else. They're testing people for leadership abilities. They're testing people emotionally, psychologically. For example, they'll put like a sniper rifle in someone's hand, they'll have them look through the sniper scope, and they'll have them, you know, aiming at all these people, and they want to say who's going to pull the trigger. Some people, even in a mind-controlled state, just have so much empathy, so much compassion, they just can't do that. Whereas other people, because they have a preponderance of reptilian DNA, Draco DNA, which I'll get more into in the second half, they'll just happily blast away. And whether or not the people they're really aiming at are real in a subjective sense, or it's like a virtual reality, or it's astral dreamscape manipulation, doesn't matter. They just want to see if the person will pull the trigger. No, the person won't pull the trigger. All this person is good for is medical work. All this person, let's say someone has on the surface, they're very good computer skills, right? They could find themselves working on a very highly advanced data processing system in an underground base somewhere in a mind-controlled state. Other familiar scenarios that MILABs find themselves in is the medical scenario. They find themselves in what look like medical clinics or hospitals. They're laying in a hospital bed. There's doctors, there's nurses, the people looking at the medical charts. And sometimes, they're allowed to wander sometimes. So they'll walk out into the corridors and they may see like nobody in the corridors, or they can conversely see the corridors teeming with people. People walking around in hospital smocks, people walking around in night clothing, at various stages of consciousness. Some people are completely zombied out, some people with more conscious awareness than others. I happen to know some MILABs who managed to retain a tremendous amount of conscious awareness during their MILAB experiences. Like, for some reason, it's hard for the military to shunt these people, usually women, I might add, into a state where they, are zombied out or can't recognize what's going on around them. One of the problems that we have in this field is that the MILAB, just as in the case with alien encounters, the MILAB will be utilized from like the totality of the human experience. So not only will they be physically abducted by the military or the aliens, they will be astrally abducted. For example, in an alien abduction scenario, the aliens could abduct someone astrally, do medical experimentation or medical work on that person in their astral body, return them to their physical body, and they may feel discomfort in the places that their astral body was worked on, but paradoxically there's no marks, there's no bruises, right? And so those kinds of things happen. The military have long since figured out how to work with people's astral bodies and states of consciousness. Remember that deep black elements of the military have always strived to, if not duplicate alien technology, alien capabilities, they want to exceed it. They want to push the envelope. And remember that these deep black elements of the military aerospace community, these are the same people who did plutonium experiments on children in the 1950s, right? They made children eat plutonium laced like cereal and oatmeal and whatnot. I could have told them what was going to happen. The kid's going to get sick and die. I mean, why do they need to do that? Because they're a bunch of psychopaths, basically. We're dealing with people that have no ethics, no morals, no restraint, with an unlimited black budget. And the black world is pulling the resources of the surface world into it like a black hole. All the stuff that we see around us, the resources, everything, it's like the surface level world is being polluted all across the board. But meanwhile, they're pulling in all these resources, money, material, people, because people are regarded as assets, they're regarded as resources. And what are the kind of environments, settings people find themselves in that are MILABs? Well, they can find themselves in a military environment. They can find themselves like on a runway, at an air base. They can find themselves in a big hangar. They can find themselves training with other military people and presumably other MILABs, just endless running, endless swimming. Even if the person's not a strong swimmer in the regular surface world consciousness, for some reason, they can manage to turn this person into a champion swimmer in these experiences to the point where they recall being able to breathe and swim underwater without a scuba kit or a rebreather rig. Because they're able to shunt people into these altered states of consciousness where they've created entire alternate personalities that have these skill sets, that have maybe entirely different persona than their normal front consciousness. But sometimes just bleed through. Sometimes all these people that have been trained to be quite militant, sometimes that can, project out sometimes. It just depends on the circumstances. So again, the environments people find themselves in, a military setting, they can find themselves in a military office where there just seems to be people in military sitting behind desks working on computers. And then sometimes they look down, they're wearing a military uniform too. Because some of these people, they literally put them in uniform, literally give them a rank. Sometimes they even seem to have authority and rank over regular military people in these experiences. It depends on what their skill sets are, their ability to strategize and their tactical soundness, et cetera, et cetera. Men or women will be put through their paces. And because of this long-standing interaction between deep black holes of the military and these different ET groups is sometimes the people's trainers are not even human. Sometimes, like the military trainer in a military environment may be a shape-shifting reptilian. He could look like a military guy one moment, that he just morphs and shapeshifts into a reptilian later. And they utilize people in the totality of the human experience. Astrally, they can astrally abduct people and then take them to what amounts to a virtual environment. Now, the person may just be sleeping there. I mean, if you looked at them with your eyeballs, they're just laying there in bed. But what happens is they get electromagnetically beamed to a part of their brain which induces the heavy, heavy sleep feeling, where their eyelids feel like they weigh a ton. And they're being, different parts of their brain is being beamed, and different parts of their anatomy are being beamed. And sometimes they could feel rapid eye movement behind their closed eyelids. And what they're seeing when their eyes are closed, and as they're laying there, they're seeing a movie, essentially. And it could be a military environment, it could be military training, it could be some kind of war scenario where they find themselves in a war scenario. But really, in some of those cases, it's a theater of the mind because they're just laying there in bed and they've managed to capture their consciousness and then create this virtual environment scenario that they force the person to have to act through. And the thing is, when the person's going through it, they don't know that it's not real. All they know is bombs are going off, people are shooting, people seem to be dying. They don't have the time to figure out, okay, is this a dream, is it military, is it astral experience, is it physical? No, it's like they have to go operational. They have to think their way through and survive. And a lot of the training happens in a artificial environment, simulated environment, astral environment. Nowadays, and I'm jumping all over the map, but what's been reported in the recent past, and is troubling if you ask me, is what I call astral detentions, where someone will be astrally abducted at night and they will find themselves, and the settings, scenarios vary, They can find themselves in a place simulated to look like a nightclub with tables and a stage there and fake palm trees or whatever. But they can't get out, and they know that they're not having a dream. The time is passing really slowly. They try all the doors, all the windows, they can't get out, they're stuck. And sometimes in those scenarios, they send in a couple of thugs and goons to go beat them up and harass them and whatnot. Sometimes the person may find himself in a classroom setting where they're just sitting there with these other people in a classroom setting, and they're just stuck there for a long, long time. And some of these people that report this are veteran astral travelers. They know how to make their astral bodies go back to the physical body, but they can't. All the tricks that they use over the years to make their astral bodies go back don't work. And time passes excruciatingly slowly in these places. And what's even more annoying is some of the people in the classroom, they don't seem to know that it's not a dream, right? And then some of the more switched on people will stand up and look, this is mind control. This is an astral abduction. We don't belong here. Some of the people I know, they've resorted to something which I think is wonderful. When they find themselves in an astral detention scenario where, and again it varies, another astral detention scenario is someone finds themselves in a city, and they walk from one end to the other of the city, and they meet all kinds of people, and the entire city is enclosed by a big high wall, and again, time passes really slowly. They go to the trouble of walking here, walking there, going into buildings, going into rooms, but they just can't get out. They're just stuck there. And what some people do when they find themselves in this astral detention scenario, they kind of get radical. Like in a classroom setting, they'll pick up a desk and they'll throw it across the room. They'll throw books at the instructor in the front of the class, and they'll yell at everybody. You know what? And sometimes that works, and they send them back. Whatever it takes, whatever works. Sometimes they don't like unpredictability, right? And these astral detentions can be so bad happening nightly that people dread going to sleep because they think they're just going to be stuck in this astral detention place. And what's even more alarming is people that are not even alien abductees or MILABs, people that are activists in chemtrails, people that are activists in exposing the Agenda 21 scenario, they're starting to report astral abductions, where they're being sucked out of their body at night, they're stuck in some place, they can't get out. So again, it's a frequency war, right? There's a lot of ways to deal with this, with tensor rings and orgone pyramids and hematite, and there's a lot of Himalayan salt lamps. All that is real, all that works to one degree or another. So this is, it is a frequency war. How much time do we have, ma'am? 4 minutes past 8? Okay. There's also what amounts to, there's a connection between high technology on the one hand and ceremonial magic, ritual magic, black magic on the other. Again, it comes down to bloodlines. Some of these people, these warlocks, these adepts, and these cults that do all these horrific things, that have these stupendous psychic supernatural powers, they themselves are reptilian human hybrid host for entities. When we talk about a host, we talk about a hybrid human who has one or more entities that they're carrying around as a passenger. And oftentimes, people don't even know they're a host for an entity, but you know they're a host because you feel the energy. You feel the reptilian energy. You feel like a strange pressure in your heart center. You feel a pressure in your solar plexus. Pay attention to what your body tells you. See, thinking is too slow. It's way too slow. Expanded awareness, expanded consciousness is where it's at. Like the German field marshal, Erwin Rommel, he had what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl, I think it's called, a sixth sense. He would say, he would be with the staff somewhere, and he'd suddenly say, let's get out of here, we're about to be shelled. And they get in their vehicles, they drive about a mile away, suddenly the place they just left is plastered with artillery shells. How did Rommel know that, right? Because he was tuned into his environment. Animals tune into their environment. Like a newborn doe is tucked away in some semi-safe place by its mother to protect it from predators. Because animals are aware of the nature of the multiple threat environment in which they reside. Interesting, but humans don't seem to know that, do they? Right? They give their children They allow their children to be vaccinated. They feed their children GMO food. They allow their children to be brainwashed and programmed. And it's like humans today, many of them, they've lost the survival instinct. They've lost the ability to tune into the environment. It's like, oh, something's wrong, something's weird. When I start to feel a negative presence, I look around. Because if it's not emanating from an individual, in other words, if there's not an individual who's a host, like lugging one of these entities around, that means that the entity is invisible. And the entity is invisible doesn't mean it's not there, it's just not visible in the physical, in the visible spectrum. I put my shields up. It's a frequency war. Okay, I wear, labradorite, mookaite, hematite. I come prepared for battle when I go to these places, right? So the point of relevance is that in these deep black military aerospace operations, there is sometimes a connection with what people call black magic, but it's really intentions. It's like if one has, metaphysical powers, it's what one does with it, right? With intentions. If it's service to self, service to others. Unfortunately, in some of these deep black projects, they've merged deep black magic, ceremonial magic with the high technology. This is why Bill Hamilton called his book Alien Magic. He called it specifically Alien Magic because there are aspects of alien technology and alien capabilities that are magical to us. Remember, these beings, they have a mastery and control of time. They can abduct all of us right now and return us in a seamless fashion, or not even a second has passed in our linear time, but we've all been taken. They have that ability. They have the ability to, when a craft approaches a group of people, they can activate some technology and everything stops. The birds, the people are in stop motion. That whole area becomes like kind of a bubble of a freeze frame. Some of the alien groups even have handheld devices where they can go into like a restaurant or something, or one of their hybrids, human-looking hybrids, would go into a restaurant, activate a handheld device. Everybody is in freeze frame mode. Everyone stops talking. Everyone's got food in their mouth. And then when they activate it again, everything just carries on like normal, and they don't even realize that that's happened. Well, like I said earlier, deep black elements of the military, aerospace, strive to if not duplicate, but to exceed those capabilities. And they're being taught not only by the aliens they're in league with how to utilize this technology, but in truth, many of the people that are seemingly in control of these deep black military projects are themselves adepts, are themselves warlocks. Some like high-ranking military intelligence person involved in these MILAB projects themselves may be a host for like a Draco entity, a reptilian entity, a host for a mantis being with all kinds of metaphysical powers. So what happens sometimes is, depending on the bloodline that the person, the MILAB in our example, and I differentiate between MILABs and monarchs. We know that monarchs go through a lot of satanic ritual abuse, SRA, and so forth. But some monarchs still have ET experiences, and abduction experiences, and reptilian experiences. On the other hand, there are some MILABs who may have satanic ritual abuse elements in their background, but I wouldn't categorize them as a monarch because the SRA does not seem to be the main focal point of their lives. It's an aspect of it, but not the main aspect. Sometimes, they're pulled into these things and, they get dissociated as a result. I've known of cases where a single mother with children was befriended by an active duty Navy guy for the express purpose of accessing the young children to rape and molest them so he could create dissociation and multiple personalities within the child, and then those children were pulled into a weird science military project. So, and I'll wrap this up here, and I'll talk more about what's going on and wrap this first half up. Sometimes these MILABs may find themselves physically or pulled out of their body astrally. They might find themselves in a clearing. There could be people with cloaks and hoods and torches, some kind of ceremonial thing going on. Sometimes they're pulled into a cave astrally, and they could be in there, and a whole bunch of lighted candles going on, and there's some non-human beings in there, let's say, maybe the Magus or Adept running the whole thing. You know, if you look at the sketch work of some of these people that have gone through this, you know, they will show you a drawing of a guy in a hood, but it's not a guy. It looks like a reptilian or some other critter, right? So these are things that happen to these people. And what we need to do is recognize that we are quantum multidimensional beings. It is in our nature. We just happen to get caught up in this soul recycling, soul harvesting agenda, this matrix simulation. But always remember, some of you, absolutely, by process of elimination, statistical probability, some of you had these experiences I just described. And some of you are maybe not even really aware of just how much power you wield. But when you wield it from a heart-centered place, the divine matrix, divine will starts to work through you, you will find your purpose in life. And you will be able to reach, and you will be able to inspire and encourage others. I never will, because you're you and I'm me. And you will be able to reach them and encourage them and touch them in a way that I never could. But you'll be able to go around and you'll be able to plant seeds. You'll be able to help others, encourage others. So there's nothing to be fearful about this. We knew going in what it was going to be like, right? We knew how tough it was. Many of us, I call us quick turnarounds. Some of us had a life where we died shortly before, during, or shortly after World War II. Whammo, we come back. They called us baby boomers, right? So I showed up in 1964, right after I had, 2 parallel World War II lives. I had 2 lives in World War II that ran in parallel, because those 2 lives were part of my soul group mind, right? Because people think you only have one incarnation in a given period of time, and that's not the case. Sometimes you could have parallel lives. And of course we have aspects of ourselves in other dimensions and other realities. And one thing before I finish the segment is there is definitely a time travel element, okay? They wanted me to talk about the secret space aspect, okay? But I needed to lay the groundwork about the surface level stuff that they're utilized. And some of these MILABs have been utilized in war zones, like when they destroyed Yugoslavia, in Iraq, Afghanistan. They've utilized MILABs psychically as remote viewers, as astral operators, or as physical boots on the ground operatives, okay? And sometimes they use them in groups, sometimes they use them singly, sometimes they use them men and women paired up together. So where it delves into the weird science stuff is because of what Ben Rich said, that military travel to stars. Some of these MILABs will be sent to other worlds through stargates, literal stargates, and sometimes it'll be utilized in time travel operations. They told Dan Sherman, the guy I mentioned earlier, oh yes, time travel is real. We just go around time. That's what the Zetas said. We just go around. I mentioned earlier in an example where the aliens were able to freeze frame everybody and then like turn the device off and everyone goes back to normal. No time seems to have passed for the people that were all involved. They don't know any better. And there is a missing time element, but like I said, they can also abduct people and return them with no linear time having passed in our space-time continuum. So the military has been utilizing time travel ops for some time. And not only that, not only are they sending people to other worlds through stargates and on board what amount to fleets of ships, large and small. Sometimes these are joint operations where they send people through a stargate to a distant world in our cosmos, but they'll also have a fleet or a number of ships supporting that unit on the ground. And the unit could be a mixed bag of real military people involved in these space projects and MILABs. And sometimes, like I said, some of these MILABs may have rank over the military people. They may be senior officers, if you will. Some people, there are people in the field where people routinely report them as being like at a high level in the military, in the MILAB secret space scheme of things, but it's an entirely different personality. Consciously, they're not aware of it. And another thing that I must point out too, not only are people being utilized in alternate realities, where they're being sent to a counterpart of this world, oftentimes like to steal things, weapons acquisition, and it varies. Sometimes they're sent to an Earth, but it's like an Earth that's several years behind ours. The way it's been described to me is, okay, we're up to the Apple iPhone 6, right? In some of these alternate realities that these people are sent to, they're still like in the Apple iPhone 3 or something. Things are just a little outdated. Things are a little further back in time, technology-wise. And sometimes they're sent to a place that's more advanced or pretty much about the same. So it runs, it runs the mix. So these people are utilized all over the place, and they're here in Australia. There's tremendous underground bases here in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. There's a large ET base there, which somehow has escaped the notice of the big name Sydney UFO researchers. Go figure, right? Throughout the east coast of Australia, this is a UFO hotspot. I mean, back in California, we would have to drive hours out into the desert to go to a place that was a hotspot. Now, unless we knew where there was ongoing activity, that was fine. Otherwise, we had to travel, baby. We'd be out into the desert somewhere. But right here, you're in the midst of a hotspot. The whole east coast, Sydney, Central Coast, all the way up, Mullaney, up in Queensland, Buderim, Glasshouse Mountains. Those are all hotspots. And so you're all here for a reason. Okay, we've reached the end of the first half. We're going to take a break. It was a short, rushed lecture. I couldn't go into all these details, but if you have any questions, feel free to, come up to me and we can talk about it later. Thank you very much.